Hello, Kirkomaniacs. Kirk Wilcox here. Welcome. And you never know what kind of friends you're going to make doing political satire and comedy on the internet. Years ago, I remember I was looking for a video on YouTube, a debate, a reaction video, a video about the internet's favorite communist, Hassan Piker.
No offense, but it sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
And I remember stumbling across this YouTube channel called Actual Justice Warrior, where he made some videos about Hassan Piker, referring to him exclusively as Jank's nephew, which I thought was pretty funny at the time. Decided to hit subscribe and keep an eye on him because he made some good stuff. And then a few years go by, and I remember I was in Las Vegas staying at the Excalibur Casino and Resort Hotel. I remember waking up, heading to Starbucks, dicking around on my phone, and I remember seeing a message from my good buddy, Stephen Michael Davis. And he asked, "Hey, Kirk, have you seen the new Actual Justice Warrior video?" And I said, "No, not yet. I'm in Vegas. I'll get around to it eventually." And he responded, "Oh, I'm sure you're really going to like this one." Okay. Then I check my YouTube notifications and I notice I suddenly have all of these comments from new viewers, people saying stuff like, "Hey, this is good content. AJW sent me. I'm subscribed." I was like, "Oh, this is pretty cool." And then I saw other comments saying stuff like, "What is this garbage? I don't see what AJW sees in this guy."
Well, excuse me, princess.
And I'm thinking, what's going on here? Turns out I watched the video, and it turns out Actual Justice Warrior, he was doing a video on Robert Reich. For those who don't know, Robert Reich is one of the biggest hacks in political commentary. And AJW, Mr. Justice Warrior, he started his video by shouting me out, talking about how awesome I am. And he recommended his hundreds of thousands of viewers to check out my channel because I often dunk on Robert Reich. And him shouting me out, it ended up over doubling my audience overnight. And, they say trickle down economics does not work, folks. Anyway, it was awesome and fun to see a political YouTuber that I had enjoyed for years, that I was a fan of. It was awesome to see someone like that with a larger following suddenly take notice of me and give a shout out to me. And I've been appreciative ever since. And ever since then, a lot of my viewers have often asked me, "Hey, Kirk, when are you going to do a stream with Sean, the Actual Justice Warrior?" And that time is now, folks. Please, Kirkomaniacs, welcome my guest this evening, Sean.
Sean! I think he's cute. He's so sexy.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kirkomaniacs, please welcome my guest this evening, Sean, the Actual Justice Warrior. What's going on?
I'm in awe of your intro, honestly. I was not expecting that. Very kind words. I appreciate it.
Hey, I appreciate you, man. What's been going on?
Not much, normal stuff, making videos, trying to get away from the New York heat, and just, looking at new topics to talk about. I'm into the Citizens United, the Sam Cedar versus Destiny thing, because that's probably one of the most propagandized against Supreme Court cases of all time. So I have a video that it's finally coming out. My hard drive.
Are you saying that you're in favor of corporations and the 1% just controlling our democracy?
Yes, 100%. That's exactly what it's. I'm in favor of declaring corporations people and their speech money. I'm sorry, their money speech. There we go.
Wow, unbelievable. What's happening to our democracy? How much are you getting paid by the Super Koch brothers, huh?
The Koch brother, there's only one of them now.
Yeah. May David rest in peace, folks. So where to start? I remember, do you ever watch The Simpsons? Did you grow up on The Simpsons like I did? Do you remember this episode of The Simpsons where Homer was walking around Springfield at night and he walks by a gym, and Homer, being an idiot, he didn't know how to read, and he says, "Gime? What's a gime?" And then he goes in and he sees a bunch of dudes working out and he goes, "Oh, a gime." I remember I had that experience checking out your channel for the first time. I saw Actual Justice Warrior and I thought, oh, it's probably an anti-SJW channel. And then I remember seeing an interview with you where you expressed that you developed a passion and interest for criminal justice at a young age, and that's what broadened your interest. And I thought, oh, I get it, actual justice warrior. What was that the real reason for naming your channel that?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of the idea, and it comes from Thomas Sowell, but it's been repeated by Ben Shapiro, that there's only justice, and any qualifier before it usually means something to the contrary. And at the time that I made my channel, nobody had like this name. So I grabbed it and I was like, oh, this is going to be great. And then a week later, I regretted it. But yeah, that is the idea. I wasn't going to focus exclusively on criminal cases. I was going to do other things. And I just thought that the actual made sense because, social, environmental, economic, all these other I'd said environmental, but all these other nonsensical, qualifiers always meant injustice in some form or another.
Of course, of course. So I got to ask, there's this, for those who don't know, there's this news organization that's been almost exclusively on the internet for the last 15 years. They're known as the Young Turks. And I notice a lot of your content is often dunking on the Young Turks. Well, why do you got to be so mean to the Young Turks? They're just trying to speak truth to power. I know that they may be named after the movement responsible for the Armenian genocide, and they often have sloppy reporting, and they often showcased communist knuckleheads. But why do you got to be so mean to the Young Turks?
I think honestly the reason I'm so mean to the Young Turks is because I can actually tolerate them, because when I first started looking at political stuff on YouTube, there was 5 political channels. I think I've mentioned this before, but it was like The Amazing Atheist, Thunderfoot, Lee Doran, How the World Works, The Young Turks, and Alex Jones. And I liked having something on in the background, which great advertisement for TYT, while I did work when I was in university. So the Young Turks did they released like 20 videos a day. So I would listen to them. So I know a lot about them. And then when you stop passively listening to something and start actively listening, you start to figure out that A, they're contradicting their own stated moral beliefs over and over again. And B, they're just outright lying on a bunch of different cases. And I remember, and I know I've covered this too many times on my channel, but the Michael Brown case when I was in university, that was one of the things that was popping off. And I had a professor that was the head of discipline for the NYPD. So he was into disciplining cops. That was his job. And he's told everybody straight up. And it was like a month and a half, 2 months after the Michael Brown case happened. So there was no full investigation or anything like that. And he's like, listen, they found his DNA here on the gun. He got burned. He broke down all the facts of the case. And everybody in the class, even though they're all aspiring cops for the most part, were a lot of them just didn't believe him. They're like, oh, of course he would say that. He's untrustworthy. He works for the NYPD. So obviously he's going to lie for the Ferguson police, whatever. And then years later, I looked into the case and everything he said turned out to be 100% true.
Yeah,
So,
that's crazy. In what ways do they often contradict? Go on.
TYT, to tie it back to TYT, because I forgot where I was. They were one of the people who were giving the fake side of the Michael Brown story over and over again about how Wilson killed him and all that. So that was a huge one. I always knew that around election time, they would get more terrible because they were advocating clearly for their candidate. I was a big Ron Paul guy. They were attacking Ron Paul with all this random stuff. And they supported him, of course, before he ran because they were like, oh, anti-war, that's great. And then all of a sudden they turned on him and he's the craziest when, the moment he was briefly up in the polls, he became the craziest because that's how they roll.
That's surprising because, yeah, I remember 2012. I know there was, I remember back in 2008, there was a lot of hype around Ron Paul, but a lot of it was just kind of online hype. And he never really, as we know, he never really went anywhere in 2008 or 2012. And that's why I'm surprised that they would focus. You'd think more focus would be on the Herman Cain's, who else was a big one in 2012? Mike Huckabee, Sarah Palin, Michelle Bachmann.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. I mean, obviously Mitt Romney.
Newt Gingrich.
Yes.
Rick Santorum was big in 2012. And I think he finished second, which is kind of crazy when you think about Rick Santorum.
Yeah. And no, I remember he was pretty big in 2012 too. I'm just surprised that they would spend so much time on Ron Paul
Well,
back then.
it was like it wasn't that they were spending a lot of time, but I noticed it because
I see.
Ron Paul was that person. And there's always a thing whenever you're watching anything in media or reading any article where you're like, this makes perfect sense. This thing that I don't know about that they're writing about. But as soon as you know more than the average person about whatever topic, you realize that all of these journalists are like people who started researching this last week, maybe, and they're commenting like talking total nonsense. So there was a lot of that. And, there's a very famous meme with TYT that whatever your job is, Cenk and Anna could tell you how to do it better.
That's pretty funny. Well, so you mentioned that they often contradict their like own moral stances. Like, do you have any examples of like how you notice they like often contradict themselves morally?
Well, I released a video yesterday where the premise of the video was that you've seen that Republican Arizona candidate where he's shooting, or he brings out his gun like John Wick at the
Yeah.
Klan with gardening tools. So they were like, oh my God, this is horrible. You're saying that the Democrats are going to storm your house and that you as a Republican need to kill them. It's horrible to say that they want to slaughter their political opponents and like that you're going to get attacked by Democrats. That's insane. 2 minutes later, Anna's like, get guns, get ready, get armed. The Republicans, Tucker Carlson is sending Republicans to come slaughter you. So it's like, it used to be they would contradict themselves within the same month or within the same week, or even sometimes within the same day. Now it's within the same sentence.
Oh yeah, I remember. I remember you mentioning that where she's like, I think was it John Iodoro, however the hell you say his name. He was like talking about like how they Republicans and people on the right. Not that I'm like diving on grenades for them, but like they often champion like, oh, go out and buy guns because the other side might get violent. And then Anna was literally doing the same thing 2 minutes later.
Well, no, Anna was saying that this is horrible, and then Anna contradicted Anna.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is a moment in there that cracks me up where John says something, Anna's like, right, and then she completely unacknowledged continues on her rant, like priceless kind of stuff. I always love those awkward moments on TV where you could tell that somebody clearly has the upper hand, like Sargar and Crystal. Like you could tell Crystal Ball has the upper hand in every one of their exchanges.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the contradictions I noticed with them a while ago was I think they made a big deal about like that graduation or prom picture where like the kids were like jokingly like raising their hands and it looked like they're doing like a bunch of like Nazi salutes and they made a big outrage about, oh, even if it's a joke, it's not funny. But then there was like there was a video of Anna and Hassan Piker talking about how cool it'd be to have like a communist themed prom. And it's like, oh, so that was just all fun and games. And like they've always had this double standard where they have like Marxists and communists on their channel. And then whenever there's like troubling extremists from the right, they freak out. And you could say rightfully so. But then when there are extremist knuckleheads on the left that we should worry about, they seem pretty fine, if not evasive of it.
Oh, a perfect example, that is the name The Young Turks.
Yeah.
Cenk won't change it. He thinks he has too much brand like integration with it. Go watch videos of Cenk talking about the Washington football team, what they used to be called. Go watch videos of him talking about like any of these teams. Like even like the Seminoles, they have people in the Young Turks saying that the Florida Seminoles need to change their name. And that's like a acknowledgement of a history of that area. It's not disrespectful at all. But Cenk won't change the Young Turks ever. He's going to hang on to that.
Yeah, imagine if like Breitbart called themselves like the Hitler Youth or something. Like everyone would freak out about it. But if TYT, like they named themselves after a movement, was it a party or a movement? I can't remember. Like, but like whatever it was, they were responsible for the Armenian genocide, and for there to be a news network in today's age named after it, and no one bats an eye, it's pretty ridiculous.
Well, so Cenk's defense is that it's named after the Rod Stewart song, and like Young Turk
really?
Means young progressive, fighting against the establishment in like Urban Dictionary, which by the way might have been written by Cenk in Urban Dictionary. Not saying anything, just saying. But Cenk he bought the domains for the Young Turk and the Young Turks when he was a Republican. So, and while he was denying the Armenian genocide. So he published his first little op-ed in college in 1991, and his last one, his letter to like Salon, was in 1999. He bought the domains in 97, 98. And then he said he became a progressive after Bush versus Gore. So figure out why a Republican in the Federalist Society who's actively, defending the Young Turks, the organization, is saying that he's naming his organization for young progressives fighting against the establishment.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to add up. So yeah, you often make, for those who don't know, Sean often makes videos reacting to and dunking on the idiots over at the Young Turks. Do you have any other favorite targets or personalities that you like to keep an eye on in case they slip up and you got to make some corrections?
There's some that, so I used to enjoy Jank's nephew, who was in your open more, but he streams so much on Twitch. It's like so long that it's taken the fun out of it for me to go into his stuff and look at his takes. I'm enjoying H3H3. I'm like borderline hate watching Philip DeFranco at this point, and like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with that, because he doesn't really he doesn't take positions on almost anything. That's like his whole shtick. He's starting to now, which means for years it was kind of deceptive. But like every time there's a controversial issue with DeFranco, like I kind of watch it for like this kind of entertainment, where he's like, he states it and he's like, but I'm gonna throw it off to you guys. Like, you tell me what you think. Like, he doesn't have any opinions. But then when something's completely non-controversial, like, people who hurt children, he's like, we should set them on fire. And it's like the most extreme position. It's like, wow, Phil, you're against people that we put on a registry for life because their crime is so bad. You're so stunning and brave. So he's one of my favorites that I haven't even made that many videos on.
Yeah, I don't mind if someone like wants to deliver news or commentary without taking an opinion. If anything, we could probably use a little more than that. But I think I don't know, it's kind of fun like delivering hot takes and giving your opinion. At least I have fun doing it. Who are some of your biggest intellectual influences? I know earlier you mentioned Thomas Sowell. I think we've talked about Thomas Sowell before. Have there been any other thinkers or intellectuals that have had an impact on how you approach politics and commentary?
I would say like Ron Paul kind of got me into politics, like that. And it's weird because looking back at some of the stuff that I would watch, and I always make fun of because we see parallels of it today. It would be like Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich should run on the same ticket, and it was like the anti-war dorks that would do that. But like they're completely different, opposite end of the spectrum people who just happen to agree on foreign policy to a certain extent. Like, and even then, that's a little bit like loose. But through that, I ended up finding Judge Andrew Napolitano. And I remember when Trump said that he was going to consider appointing Napolitano to the Supreme Court because Napolitano was on, he's on Fox. But Andrew Napolitano is the real deal. Like, he's one of the youngest lifetime serving judges in New Jersey history. He has a great educational pedigree. Like, his books are interesting. I love the way he talks about the Constitution. And I probably learned a lot about the American Constitution. And he's even changed my opinion on a lot of that stuff. And he's not some partisan hack. Like, he would attack George W. Bush for what he perceived to be civil rights violations and all that. And he was also a goofy TV judge for a while. I really like Andrew Napolitano. And I mean, there's some others. I just can't think of them off the top of my head.
Like, have there been like any like books you've read over the last few years from like big intellectuals, big thinker types that have influenced you?
Well, I went through a lot of Thomas Sowell. I did read The Righteous Mind from Jonathan Haidt. I know he says it's pronounced height, but that's wrong. Look at how it's spelled. I've actually read a bunch of books, and it's weird when I talk to Stephen Michael Davis, Adam Friended, and those guys. It's like the same book list, but they're not really, they're discovered almost independently. One of the ones that actually changed up the way that I think about foreign policy is called The Modern Mercenary. And it was actually recommended to me by a patron who's a really cool guy who works as a military contractor. And like that really changed my perception of like where foreign policy is going, and probably made me a bit more like hawkish on foreign policy, like move me away from Ron Paul. Because, and it's weird because it's a consequence of American hawkishness policy that we're kind of going to see the barrier of entry to warfare lower and mercenaries become more prevalent. But when you look at like the alternative of, state monopoly on force versus anybody who can hire a militia or, a sophisticated military, it leads to a lot of problems. So like, I actually found that book really interesting. The Dictator's Handbook is really like it changed my perception on power. And I actually found that book through CPG Gray, whatever his name is. He did like a video on it, and I found that video through Game of Thrones content on the internet, which is really weird. But it's very interesting. It's like how institutions work, and like how to retain your position on power. And that like made me view issues like Russia, or like why Vladimir Putin is acting in a way that he's acting differently, or
He's
versus
just
China.
afraid of NATO, Sean. It's NATO's fault.
Yeah. NATO aggression has caused Russian invasions to the West for hundreds of years. Like, have you heard about my time traveling NATO theory, by the way?
No.
NATO time travel.
I think I have. Maybe I don't remember it though.
Yeah, NATO time travel is pretty simple. Anytime there's Russian aggression west, it's NATO.
Yeah.
But
that dastardly NATO. It's funny because that's kind of how I got into objectivism. Was shortly after I moved to California. I moved here with my friend from college and my cousin. And my cousin had been into objectivism for years. And one night we were just talking about foreign policy in the Middle East, and then the next day I woke up and I checked my email, and he had sent me these lectures called "The Rise of Islamic Totalitarianism" by Yaron Brook, and I found them very fascinating. And then I looked into what else Yaron Brook was doing on YouTube. This is like back in 2013, and it was nothing but lectures about like the history of capitalism and the morality of capitalism. And then through that, I got into Henry Hazlitt and Milton Friedman, and then eventually Ayn Rand. And then, yeah, ever since it's odd. So yeah. And it eventually made me, I don't want to say hawkish, but definitely more bullish on issues of foreign policy.
I had you miscast. I thought you were like a libertarian because, similar ground on certain issues. But I found out through watching more of your content that you were an objectivist. And like I'm familiar with Yaron Brook. I've seen him do debates and all that kind of stuff. And I'm familiar with the Ayn Rand Institute because he used to be on Judge Napolitano's show, on like Stossel back in the day. John Stossel is an interesting guy that got me more into thinking about free markets and stuff like that. Because I used to be like, everybody has like their stories supposedly on the right of like, I used to be on the left or whatever. I was never on the left. I wasn't a fan of George Bush, but I was also 16 years old. And like the only left wing position I had was actually healthcare. And that was because I watched a movie from a guy named Michael Moore, and this was dumb baby Sean when that movie came out, that thought if it was in a documentary, it must be true. If it was said with some production value, obviously it was true. And so that was like the position I had for a year or two.
Hey, say what you will about Michael Moore. He is really, and I mean this, he is really phenomenally good at lying.
Oh, he's also he's a talented filmmaker, and he's obviously an egomaniac. He made himself the star of every one of his movies, and a lot of that's based on the fact that his fiction, which you can go find, is trash. Like he wants to be Tarantino or like a Fincher or something like that, but instead he makes documentary films. So that's some of that anger he's got built up in him, because he tries to do these comedy movies. And he's very, deceptive and tricky. Like, the story about the what you call it, the gun over the head shot in what's that movie called? Bowling for Columbine.
I know the South Park guys did not like how they were portrayed in that movie. I can't remember exactly what it was about though.
So I know one of them they got in there because one of them actually went to Columbine, and I know they didn't like Michael Moore because just watch Team America and Michael Moore's depiction. But there's a famous shot in the trailer of Michael Moore walking into a bank and opening an account and then walking out with a rifle, right?
Yeah.
And the whole premise of this is like, oh, this country's so crazy. If you open a bank account, they'll give you a killing machine, right? So
it's
he had
big gun and big bank working together.
Yeah. So he had called this bank 2 months in advance, and they told him, we give you a voucher. You go to the federally licensed firearm dealership, you go through the background check, and then you can have the gun. And when you open the account, you have to put in like an absurd amount of money to open a checking account compared to what you would normally do. Right now, it's like $100 or something like that. Like he had to put in, in 1999, like $1,500, right? Something like that, which, again, for like a small town, that's a lot of money to put in the account.
Also, I don't know if this applies to this story, but I've heard before the reason why banks for years would like offer you like a free toaster or whatever if you sign. I remember there was a scene of this in one of the Spider-Man movies. Like, oh, you open an account, we'll give you like something for free. I think the reason why they started doing that was because of government regulations on stuff like interest rates.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I forgot
But
what the details were, but I've heard that before.
But essentially, the bank told him no over and over again, and then he had to go basically do the background check, pick his gun, and all that before, and then he shoots the scene like you just walk into the bank and you get out. So like this 20-second, 30-second shot that's like in the trailer for the movie to show how crazy America is something that he planned and worked on for months, got the bank to, in good faith, bend their own policies of like not having a firearm on the premises just so he could slap them in the face like that. So like that's the kind of guy Michael Moore is. Not to mention Roger and Me is a movie about him trying to interview the CEO of GM. He interviewed him 2 times during the course of filming the movie, yet the movie is all about how he can't interview the CEO of GM. Even Ralph Nader hates Michael Moore.
Yeah, I remember he was one of the guys that was on Twitter praising Hugo Chavez for nationalizing oil and taking care of the poor. And look how wonderful Venezuela is. And now I don't think he's walked that back yet.
Well, I mean, why would he? There's no consequences for saying, look, it's this. You just pick a new country and you say, oh, socialism is working over here again. And then you ignore it later on and you blame something like, the Young Turks line on that is, countries with oil never develop an economy. Just never happens. So, the problem is oil in Venezuela. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, it was because we put sanctions on Venezuela, and it was the greedy businesses in Venezuela that raised prices. It wasn't because of the crazy inflation from the central government adding all this money to the economy.
The funny thing is there's a video by Stephen Michael Davis where he talks about how the left wants Venezuelan style socialism, but they don't know it. And there's one part, and he's done a couple of videos, but there's one part where he goes over the fact that they started their experiment with worker co-ops, doing everything as worker co-ops. So they had like something like a couple hundred in Venezuela before Chavez. They institute this program. It blows up to, tens of thousands within a couple of years. And the worker co-ops are supposed to take care of the community. But the thing is if you own a business with 10 people, just because you vote doesn't mean you're not going to vote to do things that are profitable. So they would always sell their products not to the state stores, but for like they would sell it on international markets because that's where you're going to make the money. The states were always underpaying. So eventually they ended up taking it from these worker co-op people because they're like, and there's like a quote from Chavez where it's like, it turns out if you put 20 capitalists in charge of a business, then you just have a business with 20 capitalists in charge of it. It's not a socialist institution. And they would like vote people out, get their kids in, all the same things that we see everywhere with these like group owned kind of entities. People secure it for them and theirs, and then they vote out people that are problems. So that's something that they definitely want. And then these people that advocate for modern monetary theory just print a bunch of money. That's
hold on. We call it PMMT on this show. Print more money theory.
Yeah, just print more money. And that's again what they did. And that's also Zimbabwe's theory of economics, but
and Sri Lanka is dealing with it right now, apparently.
Yeah, I caught a video on that too. That was from your video. That was from your video, was it not?
Yeah, that's right. Hit subscribe, folks.
That's where I first heard the print more money theory.
Isn't it ironic though with Michael going back to the Michael Moore thing about how he got a gun? Like it's socialists like him that say, "Oh, you can't trust greedy bankers and big banks," and meanwhile he's the one scheming over this innocent bank that's just trying to offer a bonus for people to sign up for their account.
He's the gargoyle-like individual who's like setting all this stuff up from behind the scenes, screwing over the bank. Like he has everything about him is like super sketchy, and all the way to the appearance, and then and then he fakes it for his movie, and then they don't get to tell their side of the story. Like there was a guy who made a movie about how Michael Moore sucks. I think it was called Michael Moore Hates America, and he interviews these people that he screwed over and over again, like in his films. And by the way, Michael Moore's shtick is so lame. Like I'm not like, I know you're not a big fan of the populists, and I agree with you, like on that. But like his stick is like I find these like salt of the earth red state people, and then I get them to say, "Oh, it's Republicans, free markets screwed me over," and it's like every one of his movies is the same. And eventually, as I got older, it really started to grate on me, like how formulaic all this stuff was.
Yeah, I remember I got so-called seduced by some of his early movies when I was young, dumb, and naive. But yeah, I remember we were talking about foreign policy, and you thought you were kind of surprised by my so like, are you still like a fan of Ron Paul, given that you've become more hawkish on foreign policy? Because I don't think it's unfair to say that Ron Paul is definitely one of the more isolationist, kind of blame America first when it comes to foreign policy issues.
I still have a lot of respect. I don't want to say love politician, but like a lot of respect for Ron Paul, and there's a lot of things I find interesting about him. But I've come to accept the idea that if America moves out of a location, then it's going to create a vacuum, and it might not be true everywhere that America needs to be everywhere that they are. But there's a reason why like NATO exists, and why, and I can't stand these people that are like, when the Soviet Union should have fell, NATO should have fallen, or like don't get involved at all in Asia. Just let them take Taiwan, let them take all these other different things. It'll be totally fine. I mean, we're watching Japan rearm themselves in order to fight off the Chinese, and these are the people who are like, we definitely like we're making up this threat between the threat of China. Like, it's America's fault. We antagonize China and all that. And it's like, well, why are the Japanese arming like, why are they breaking their peace constitution to arm up? Like,
yeah, I think a lot of people think of foreign affairs as, especially with how to deal with Russia, as the Butter Battle book, the Dr. Seuss book. You ever read or watch the cartoon based on it? So yeah, it's based on like these two societies that are divided by a wall. It was definitely like allegorical of the Cold War, but it was like, oh, the difference between them is one side likes to butter their bread butter side up, and the other one likes to butter their bread butter side down. And they're having a weapons race, and then it comes to a standstill where they're like, there's a guy from each side on the wall with like a bomb that could blow up the other side. And it's like, oh, who's going to drop the bomb first? And I remember reading in retrospect that Dr. Seuss got a lot of criticism at the time for putting out this book. It's like, oh, you're just going to chalk up the ideological differences between the Soviet Union, one of the bloodiest dictatorships, arguably the bloodiest in human history, with the United States and Western countries, while not perfect, definitely far preferable to the madness that goes on under communism.
well, I mean, the Soviets said the right things though about like equality and whatever, feed everybody. I mean, they didn't do that, but they said that. But there's actually a South Park episode that's like that, where Richard Dawkins ends up like sleeping with Mrs. Garrison, who's a trans, and then everybody in the world becomes atheist.
Yeah.
But in the future, they're fighting over the name of their atheist group. Like, should it be American Atheist Alliance, Atheist Alliance of America? And then there's like otters that are like, we are the like something. They're all like it's the same principle though. And like the idea is people would fight over any difference, no matter how small. I guess, but yeah, no, there's huge differences between the Soviet Union and the United States. The United States is better. Like, I know a lot of people are like, oh no, equivalent, or the Soviet Union somehow better. I don't even know, like, what metric are you using? And the Soviet Union wasn't an aggressive force in the world because of NATO. Like, in fact, they were limited by NATO. Team America.
Hell yeah. Yeah, we were just talking about Team America earlier. But yeah, definitely. The West, mixed economy, far from perfect, but compared to the Soviet Union and communist China, I say communist China as compared to the Republic of China that people call Taiwan. But as I've said, we should start calling Taiwan China, and we should start referring to China as an occupational zone that's illegitimately occupied by a hostile, brutal dictatorship.
Right. I was going to say, because I did mention South Park, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, big intellectual influences. Watch some of those episodes of South Park from back in the day. The Starbucks episode versus Tweaks Coffee, one of the best examples of how small business isn't always like the more noble cause or anything like that. And about how people are trying to vote something out just because they don't like the aesthetic of it, and like they, basically like they can't outcompete them, so they're using the vote and like this smear campaign in order to get this company out of there. Another great example, and they use kids in order to do it. Like, it's a great episode that has a lot of like free market messaging in there. There's the Boy Scouts one where they try to get the gays in Scouts, and then their gay character at the end is like, no, like freedom means that you can choose who you want to associate with. So they had a lot of great episodes that were like that. And so Matt Stone and Trey Parker, I love South Park.
And they had the balls to like want to try to draw Muhammad. And I guess the reason why Comedy Central was just worried about, they weren't offended, but I think they were genuine. If I recall correctly, whoever was in charge at Comedy Central was just afraid of getting like attacked by terrorists or whatever if they put Muhammad in an episode of South Park.
Yeah. Well, they had him.
What?
They had him in one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the only episode I haven't seen was episode 200 where they bring him back, and it only aired once, and I haven't been able to watch it since. I don't know if it's available somewhere.
They have him in one earlier. Like that was part of the thing, is like before the whole Danish cartoon thing, they had an episode called like the League of Super Best Friends where they had Muhammad with the power of fire. And so like that's another example. Like they were taking a moral stance. Like they already had all the money and like all the glory and all that. And they were trying to do that because they wouldn't let them do it. But also they hated Family Guy. So they decided to frame this in the episode of them hating Family Guy. And in an interview, Matt and Trey were like, well, we figured they might get confused and bomb Family Guy instead of us. And I was like,
yeah,
they never stopped making it a joke. And I thought that was amazing.
I guess that's how they got Imagination Land. That's why they made Imagination Land, because they heard, I guess like Seth MacFarlane had complained in an interview that South Park and The Simpsons kept winning all the Emmys for half-hour animated program, but there was a separate Emmy award for hour-long animated program. So that's why Family Guy made the Blue Harvest episode, because they were gunning for that Emmy. And so South Park decided to make Imagination Land just to compete with them with that for that Emmy, and they ended up winning it.
Yeah. Well, Seth MacFarlane sucks. Like Seth MacFarlane there's a great interview with Penn Jillette. It's on Larry King and Seth MacFarlane there. And he really doesn't get it. Like the whole Muhammad thing, like he keeps saying, well, he's like, I don't know why they think this is going to be like the funniest joke ever. Like he does not get the principled stand behind what they're doing. And I start thinking about Family Guy, and there's like a bunch of earlier episodes that, were better in terms of quality. But I start thinking about it, and it's basically like, the same generic stuff. Like South Park will make fun of anybody, anything. They made fun of Scientology when Isaac Hayes was chef and a Scientologist, and he actually left the show over it. But they still did it anyway. And what you call it, like Seth MacFarlane he's doing your basic, Christian bad, right? Like he never actually takes any stance or anything. Like he never actually does anything controversial. It's just the appearance of controversy.
Yeah. What else was I going to say about South Park? What's interesting about South Park is they've had some episodes where they do promote free markets, like the Starbucks episode. They also had the episode where Mr. Garrison invents the new travel machine that's superior to airlines, and then it gets shut down by the government to protect the airline industry and whatnot. Yeah. And I find this funny because in one of the early episodes of South Park, they explicitly shit on Atlas Shrugged, which those episodes we just mentioned, particularly the Starbucks one and the airline one, those have the same themes of government protectionism, of shutting down innovation and successful businesses in the name of like protecting jobs and protecting the small business and fighting for the so-called little guy.
Right. And what's funny is like I never until I got into politics and learned about Ayn Rand did I realize like how many times her book appears in these like negative imagery all over the place. But I think the story of that might have been that they made all these episodes that were considered very free market episodes because these are things that they believed. And first of all, that episode is about a guy who sleeps with chickens and Officer Barbrady learning how to read, and the guy sleeping with chickens to teach Officer Barbrady how to read. South Park is amazing. And he like, I think that somebody actually gave them that book and they hated the book. So like that's why, because if you notice, he's like, I'm gonna curl up in the bathtub and read a good book, and then the cut to it later is like, this sucked, which is
Yeah,
hilarious.
this makes me never want to read again.
Yeah.
But going back to Family Guy, yeah, Family Guy in the early days was pretty funny. I always thought that American Dad surpassed them eventually. And I always thought it was interesting because American Dad got approved when Family Guy was canceled, and it was supposed to be like their satire on like American conservatism and neoconservatism and foreign policy. Then Family Guy comes back, and it's weird because Family Guy eventually became a lot more political, whereas American Dad became much more of a family-friendly, typical animated sitcom.
Right. I never watched American Dad because, I thought the structure was like too similar. It's like I never got into Futurama because I was like, oh, there's like The Simpsons, and I hear great things about it, like from people who actually watched it. And I'm like, I already got The Simpsons, whatever.
Yeah.
Like I don't need. You get one show from me, that's it, right? And but yeah, that Family Guy really did become more political, and I get like they have writers change over the years. It's not. There's no situation in media where you have these two guys that are best friends since college, like Matt and Trey, and they write all the episodes within a week together, and they bring on a writer here and there, like to help them, but it's really just those two guys. So like I get Seth MacFarlane wants to do whatever he wants to do and go be fun Hollywood guy, but you could tell that there's definitely a huge drop in the quality. And one of the things you notice about Family Guys, they would always have the cutaways, but they used to have a plot, like a through line for the episode, and that just didn't exist. And in The Simpsons, they had a guy that would counterbalance the cynicism of Matt Groening. So for like the prime seasons 3 to 9, or 3 to 8, whatever it is, this guy was like, you have to put in like some heart up for these characters. Like you have to keep it, like you have to you have to make people connect with all of them. And that was really true of The Simpsons, because one of their most controversial episodes is the Seymour Skinner is like principal, like he's like something Tannenbaum or whatever, and people hated it. Yeah, they hated it because they were like, no, we got invested in this character, and like the creators didn't even realize like how invested they were in these secondary characters and their storylines and all that. But like that's like the impact that those writers had, and it seems like now it's just like, there's nothing, there's no like Meg is ugly, like Stewie's gay, I guess. Like he used to be evil, now he's just a gay. Yeah. And like Lois and Peter's a jerk, and Lois is like an alcoholic. Like whatever problems a middle-aged woman has, it's just very like cynical. It's actually kind of mean-spirited, but not even in a funny mean-spirited way.
Yeah, I'm getting people in the chat saying, oh, yeah, I think the original chicken fight was a pretty good gag. Like, yeah, I think it was funny like the first or second time, and then they ended up doing like 10 of them, I think.
Yeah.
Well, you're not expected to talk about animated comedies.
Well, it's also everything gets obsessed with callbacks and like it's so obnoxious.
I always thought The Critic. Did you ever watch The Critic? That was like I think it came on Fox in the late 90s. It was kind of like Family Guy before Family Guy, but looking back, I can't help but wonder if Family Guy really cultivated a culture that really embraced like the memification of the internet, where everything is like a pop culture. Not that I hate memes. I love memes. Right. I make a lot of them, but a lot of memes are just like basically Family Guy callback jokes at this point.
Yeah, you have a meme behind you, the Super Smash Brothers awkward pose thing. Like,
well, it's a screenshot from the actual video game Super Smash Brothers Brawl on the Nintendo Wii, and a lot of people,
I what you go. I used to, I mean, I'll let you finish, but I used to play that game a lot, and we used to take awkward screenshots. If I could ever find them, I'll post them.
Yeah, I think when this happened, I was playing with my friends in college, and we ordered pizza, and we had to pause. I was like, "Oh my god, it looks like Jigglypuff is eating Donkey Kong's ass, and that Donkey Kong is enjoying it. Like he's laying there with his eyes rolled back in his head, like you can see." And I know that's why it's funny, because you cannot perform oral sex in Smash Brothers Brawl. It is a family-friendly game. I know, because I've tried many times, folks.
Yeah, no, it's true. Those like Nintendo super family friendly. So like I always notice that you have a big like video game motif. Like I noticed you have like the it sounds like the Capcom opening. Like, you know,
Oh,
with
that's the
the
Game Boy Advance. One of my
ah,
objectivist buddies was, I think he's like into like graphic design, and he's like, hey, I'll do like an intro for you if you want. Like I can make something like the Game Boy Color. I was like, okay, let's check it out. And then he sent that to me. I was like, oh, thank you.
it made me think of like Capcom because I still play my Super Nintendo every now and again, and I have Mega Man X, and it like kind of opens similar to that. But yeah, you're right. It's the Game Boy, 100%, like the sound and all that. Oh my
Damn
god,
straight.
throwback. Look at me. I'm criticizing nostalgia and then talking about 90s video game systems. What's wrong with me?
And I got to rope in Ralphie the Revolutionary with his intro. I made it the original Game Boy intro screen to like make it look like, yeah, this is communism, like a stagnation in innovation and technology. It's something from yesterday.
Somebody says Sean plays baby games too. No, no.
Okay,
Get out of it. First of all, I don't play Game Station.
this is one of my viewers. He often comes to me. He watches a lot of my streams. He's a fan. But he does Twitch streams where he plays like first person shooters, games that I am really terrible at, and he likes to roast me because I'll play like Mario Kart and Mario Maker and Earthbound and a bunch of easy games that kids can play. So that he's always roasting me for that.
They used to be really hard when I was a kid, and now I can beat like Mega Man X in 2 hours. I actually have a
Mega
series of
Man
videos.
X is hard.
The first one though, like on
Yeah.
for Super Nintendo, and I have like a series of videos that I did way back when on another channel where I do beat it, and if you like add it up, it's like 2 hours, and it's just I don't know. I used to play that game with my cousin, my brother, and my uncle into the night and lose every single night because it was so difficult. And then as an adult, I'm like, oh well, it's super easy. And then I told my cousin when we were adults, I'm like, you know, I beat that game every once in a while when I'm bored. And he's like, really? Like he's still shocked because he never kept his old systems like I did. So he's like, that's impossible. But yeah, it's just those old games are great. The new stuff is too many moving things. It confuses my brain, my old man brain.
Yeah, you boomer. Can't keep up with the kids anymore, can you?
For sure.
Not on
But
board with new technology.
But do you think that there is the obsession with nostalgia, um, like in all of our pop culture and also kind of in our politics, like everybody's trying to go backwards, make America great again. Like, you know, you got you have like 50s guys now, and then like, you know, even like a bunch of the lefties want to try these like old, tired, tried and failed ideas. Like, do you think that like our pop culture has like influence on that? Because everything in our pop culture is like 1980s were awesome. 1990s are starting to be that was awesome.
I had a pet theory on this once because I don't think it's new, but I remember like in the 90s, like the 70s started to come back. Like all the cool kids in middle school, not all of them. I think grunge was in, but like a lot of kids like started to wear like bell bottoms and like tie-dye shirts and I think what happens is and I remember like in the 2000s when I was in college, like the 80s made a comeback and now like the 90s, like a lot of like kids today are like wearing like NBA logos from the 90s and whatnot. I think what happens is like a lot of parents will have like kids young and then they'll raise their kids on the stuff they grew up with. So like a lot of the kids in the 90s, they were like listening, like their parents would play music from the 70s and watch movies from the 70s that the kids would end up latching onto. And then they would copy the styles and the fashion and really like the music. And so I think just like every 20 years, and I think you maybe trace this back to the 70s, because if you recall the 70s, what show was popular? It was Happy Days. Happy Days was based in the 50s. Then in the 90s, we got that 70s show. So I don't know how true it is. That's something I've always thought about, where it's just like, I think like fashion and style and trend just kind of repeat every 20 years because kids are raised by their parents who are roughly 20 to 30 years older than them.
And I also think the internet like is conducive to commentary. Like, you know, I hate to say this as an internet commentator, but commentary is easy comparatively to creating something new.
Absolutely.
So, like, you know, you're able to latch on and like embrace these fanhoods. I will say the one thing I disagree with you on is although the 90s is becoming popular now, and there's some great like 90s kids cartoon shows, Batman the animated series, that whole DC EU is animated universe, amazing. But we've been in like the 80s for like, you know, like 20 years now, like 20, 30 years. The 80s have officially lasted longer than, you know, 3 80s. And it's the same section of the 80s too, because it's not like the 80s was the same all the way through. And it's everything is 80s. Like even new things like Stranger Things take place in the 80s.
Oh yeah. Um I think a reason why a lot of millennials look fondly back at the 90s, I've said this before, but I think the 90s was a very rare time in American history where the Cold War had just ended. And so kids weren't growing up with this fear of like a nuclear holocaust that was started by the Soviet Union. They weren't scared by the big, scary Soviet Union and communism and whatnot. And it was before 9/11,
Yeah.
and America was not at war. The economy was booming. There was a lot of cool stuff in the pop culture going on, like The Simpsons and South Park, Attitude Era wrestling, and a lot of fun stuff going on in the 90s. Politics, I think it was divided in a lot of ways that people kind of overlook. But I think there's just this fondness of the 90s because it was like before, it was like right after the Cold War and that whole hysteria. And it was right before 9/11 and going back to war and a lot of cynicism toward America and capitalism and whatnot.
And halfway through the 90s, crime actually started dropping. Because,
Yeah.
the 90s, in terms of crime, it was one of the worst periods up until 1996. So, for that, for that 5 years up until 9/11, what we were arguing over Bill Clinton, who may or where Bill Clinton may or may not have stuck a cigar, and what you call it, like that was a interesting period of time. Like I'm a New Yorker. I know you have like some New York connections. Were you in New York at the time of 9/11? Are we gonna do the where were you thing?
No. Okay, I've only been to New York once. I have relatives that live in upstate New York. Actually, one of my grandmas lives in New York and is actually from New York. But I've that's the only tie I really have to New York. But I was in Michigan. I'm originally from Michigan, and yeah, I remember I was in English class, and we had this thing in our school that I guess I eventually learned was not a common thing. We had like nutrition break, which was like a 15-minute break, like in the morning, where you could like buy Pop Tarts or whatever or a bagel and just chill out for 15 minutes. It was like after second hour. And I remember like the teacher picking up her phone at the desk and like her, like just like her smile dropping. And she's like, okay. And then she hangs up the phone and turns on the TV. And then we see the World Trade Center on fire.
Did they yank you out of school?
No,
Like your parents, or
no.
I got yanked out of school by a neighbor. They turned me over to a neighbor. They're like, whatever, like get out of here. Because like in New York, first of all, the way that they told us, which was not to tell us, they were like, "Does anybody have any parents that work in the towers?"
Oh,
And I'm like,
God.
this is a terrible way to set this up. But what's interesting is I actually had a this was very obviously it was very traumatic, like at the time and all that. And I have families of that were named after that day, first responders or whatever. Thankfully everybody within my family survived, but there are like there's, if you ever in New York, there's an ambulance for New York Presbyterian Hospital. There's 2 badges on the back, and those are the badges of their 2 EMTs that died, or paramedics that died that day. And those were friends of the family. Like they would come over to our house and smoke cigars for barbecues and all that. Like, and so like we had like family friends. I was a kid, so I barely knew them, but like we had family friends that died and all that. But I remember that was the setup for how they told. They gave everybody away to the parents, and everybody was afraid like the attacks are going to happen in the schools. Like it's like it didn't even make any sense. Like we weren't even in Manhattan. And it was like, oh well, like they're gonna go like everywhere's a target and all that. It was one of the craziest times, like ever. Like it's actually a day where you remember where you are and all that. But yeah,
it's easy to forget. Like shortly after that, like there was like all this anthrax scare, like anthrax
Yeah.
packages were being shipped. And I remember, wasn't there like a sniper in Washington D.C. for like a week or two?
the DC sniper.
Yeah.
You know what? Here's what I was gonna say. So my teacher, coincidentally at the time, and I know this is gonna set the internet ablaze because the internet's just too much with the freaking Israel stuff, was an Israeli. So she thought it would be a good idea for the rest of the school year to bring us newspapers translated from Israel about all the terrorist attacks that they were dealing with. So you're seeing on the news that you're always going to be attacked all the time. And then you're also getting news articles about like how bad terrorism is And it's like, lady, I'm like in sixth grade. Like I'm just figuring out that I like girls. Like, cut it out. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, yeah. So it was a bad time. Needless to say, the worst terrorist attack on American soil in history was a bad time. Needless to say.
Someone is asking, if you were stranded on an island, would you rather be stuck with Jank or Anna Kasparian? Anna
Oh,
Kasparian.
yeah, Anna, obviously. Like, first of all, like the only reason you would want to be stuck with Jank is what if you want, like, if you're gonna be there for longer and you might need more food. Like, like I
Yeah, 'cause
guess,
he's a
but like,
buffalo, isn't he?
yeah. But do you really want to eat Jank? Like, you got to think about it like that. Yeah, Anna, obviously. Like, Anna's attractive. Like, there's this thing on the internet where like people who are attractive are deemed like to be ugly by like these, I don't know who these supermodels are in my audience, these freaking super attractive dudes that only date like the 10 out of 10s. But like, you ever notice that anytime you talk about AOC or any of these, like these women that are, they're attractive, especially for where they are, like, like Washington DC, Congress, not exactly a bunch of lookers. There'll
Yeah.
be people that are like, she's so ugly. Like, I saw this one angle of this one photo where like her wrinkles look like this, and it's like, dude, I'd say Nancy Pelosi was hot. I'm saying that the 30-year-old is attractive. Like, Jesus.
Well, the thing with Anna, it's not so much that she's a woman and that she's attractive, but sometimes she doesn't have bad takes. And sometimes I think she has some pretty good criticisms of the left, especially when I don't know who I agreed with her dispute with Jimmy Dore, but that's another funny phenomenon. Remember when Jimmy Dore was all over the Young Turks and they were buddy buddy, and now they're constantly going at it?
Yeah, he used to work there, and they've had a falling out, which is common with Jank and his people.
Yeah.
But the funny thing about their feud is that if you listen to everything Jimmy Dore is saying, it's basically the more extreme version of what
Yeah.
Jank's positions are. Everybody's corrupt. You can't trust them. Like, you got to force the issue. You got to use everybody in the country is progressive. So if our progressive representatives just force their will upon people, then it would totally work. And Jimmy Dore, I guess he took it more seriously, and so he's turned on the squad because they're too conservative. Like,
And I
so
remember, no, go on.
I was gonna say, so in the logic that Jank portrays on his show all the time, Jimmy Dore's right. That's why
Yeah.
his audience is on Jimmy Dore's side for the most part. But in like the logic of, you're not gonna make Medicare for all happen with 6 members of Congress in the House, like alone in the House. Like, Jank is right, because that's
Yeah.
more connected to reality.
Yeah, and I think even recently, Anna Kasparian had like some rant about like separation of church and state, and I'm like, you know what? She's actually right here. The problem is whenever she wants one of her goofy ass socialist programs, a lot of times these same socialists, they'll thump their New Testament and say, "What would Jesus do?" Oh, you Republicans, you want to thump your Bible when you want your social controls, but then they'll use that same logic when they want like Medicare for all or whatever socialist garbage they're trying to push these days. And it's like, well, if it's wrong to force morality on others because of religion, why does it make it okay to force your altruistic morality on me because you want Medicare for all or
Yeah.
whatever?
And I'm an atheist, and I'm not into the religious like debates, and like I'm not into the not the religious debates, but I'm not into like the religious justification for legislation or whatever. But the idea, like, their idea is like, I guess from their reading of the Bible, the good book, Jesus would be a socialist. So therefore, all the Republican Christians need to be socialists. But like, you're not supposed to, like, Christianity. I've said it before. I'm like, if you're a Christian and you buy into this, Christianity is not supposed to be a suicide pact. Like, there is a basic principle that a lot of these like Christian conservatives have, that like charity comes from home. So like, you have to establish yourself and then like protect your family, and then you can be charitable. Like, that's a fine interpretation of religion or like philosophy if you want to give stuff away after you're already set. But like, the idea that you need to give, Jenks like, yo, it says give everything to the poor. It's like, that's stupid. That's wrong. It's like, I don't care that's in the Bible. If you give everything you have to the poor, you'll be poor, and then they're not going to be better off because, give a man a fish versus teaching a man to fish kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's a double standard with altruism. It's like it says that you have to sacrifice for others, but it's like why are others allowed to enjoy material wealth but not me? What if you give a homeless man a sandwich, okay, I'm not being selfish, but if he eats the sandwich, isn't he being selfish? Shouldn't he find someone that's hungrier than him to give the sandwich to? So
Yeah. Or like cut it in half and give it to somebody else, or cut it
yeah.
in three quarters and give the three quarters to somebody, only eat one quarter, because you don't need that much food. Does anybody really need a whole sandwich?
Does
But
anybody really need speaking of which, someone asked me this the other day to bring up. Someone asked, "What are your thoughts on Matt Walsh? Do you think Matt Walsh is a grifter?" And I guess this is related because we're talking about Christianity.
I mean, like, so like I hate the term grifter, like, because if there was like an Ann Coulter like thing, I think she was on Bill Maher, and people were saying, "Oh, you don't really believe any of the things that you're saying." And Ann Coulter looked this woman, man, whoever, directly in the face and said, think about it like this. I'm a million times more successful, and I'm not even saying the things that I believe. So how bad are you at advocating for the things that you believe that you're chasing me? So like I love that attitude, because like whether or not you're like, oh, this is genuine or not, you could have those arguments about motivations all the time, but like, can you out argue this person? Can you like, defeat them and all that? Like, you could point out hypocrisy, contradiction, and all that. And as with Matt Walsh, he's into the Christian conservatives, and like, he's one of those porn dorks that are like, ban the porns, it's bad and all that. And it's like, yeah, it's not my thing. And like his most notable like thing in the public debate is asking a basic question about like women. And
Yeah.
somehow he stumped everybody. He's made a whole documentary on one question. So if
Someone
he's
actually, Steve, do you pay attention to Stephen L. Miller?
I don't know.
He's like a libertarian leaning conservative that I follow a lot. But he mentioned the other day on his podcast, like, way to go, lefties. You turned Matt Walsh into the right wing Michael Moore.
Basically, like yeah, and I haven't watched his movie. Like, somebody needs to link me a not paid for copy of it. But because I think they charge at the Daily Wire for that. But yeah, no, it's based on one question. It's amazing. Like, somebody's asking why I'm obsessed with Hunter Avalon. I see it's a joke, but I'm not.
Yeah, why are you so obsessed with Hunter Is it Avalon or Avalone?
So somebody's corrected me in the way that I pronounce it, and I don't remember like which one. I'm assuming if I say on, then it might be own. I don't know.
But yeah, going back to Matt Walsh, I do not think Matt Walsh is a grifter. I think Matt Walsh, he strikes me as a guy that knows exactly what he wants. He's primarily motivated by religion. He once made a video that I responded to, where he said, "Yeah, we absolutely should legislate morality." And you got to ask, where does he get his morality from? Largely from religion. And yeah, in the past, he's called for banning pornography, not just internet pornography. He's explicitly called for the jailing of porn stars and whatnot.
Right.
Sometimes he has good takes. And yeah, like with the way he's been handling this, what is a woman issue? He has really exposed a lot of shitty intellectuals who work at universities who are unable to debate or deal with any confrontation on this issue. And so he makes himself look reasonable, but I think overall he's pretty unreasonable. And a lot of his I mean, he brands himself as a theocratic fascist. A lot of people might say, "Oh, he's kind of joking," and I'm like, I don't know. I kind of take him seriously, even if
Right.
he's maybe exaggerating that.
I think he definitely does want more religion involved in government. I mean, there's a lot of these like prayer in school people that
Yeah,
never went away. And what's funny is I used to be like, I used to be one of these people that are like, oh yeah, like that we're moved on from them, they're gone, whatever. Like,
yeah,
it's not a big deal. But the thing is that I read this piece. It's on the like on how the two-legged. You're familiar with the three-legged stool of conservatism, right?
yeah. Was it neoconservatism, and what were the other two?
It's like economic libertarians or economic conservatives, whatever, it doesn't matter. And then there's the social conservatives, right? And this piece makes the case that like the Republicans still need these people, the social conservatives. And the idea that you could just cut off that, the idea is a two-legged stool doesn't stand. And like it actually convinced me like these people are going to be around. There's no replacing like that
Yeah,
portion for the Republican base. And they've been successful. Like, we see all these people that are like tear down the system, and I've mentioned this over and over again. I'm not an abortion guy. Like, I never was like or pro-life or anything like that. That's not my issue. Like, if you had to pin me down, I'd be like, I'm probably pro-choice. Like, like that's how I feel about it. But like,
So you're pro murdering babies?
yes. And not just them, like, I'm also pro child labor. Like, we need to send the kids to the mines, which is a serious position, but yeah, like, but they did the work through the system in order to get that passed. Like, that is true. It's undeniable. So the idea that you want to burn it down, it's like, well, they've been working for 49 years toward this goal. It's like, can you try for a week, like, before you're like take everything down?
Yeah, and I think the problem with the whole abortion, I don't want to get too lost on the whole abortion thing, but yeah, the conservatives, the anti-abortionists know exactly what they want. They're pretty principled on their approach to this topic. And I think the Democrats, if you've seen their rhetoric as of late, they're pretty shitty on this issue. And I think a big reason for that is because they've rejected individual rights and freedom largely for decades. And so they can't really defend it from that ground of like, being selfish, having a right to your own life and making I know they'll like sometimes parrot the slogans, but
Yeah.
oftentimes when you see how they address this issue, they're grasping for straws like, oh, well, this is going to have an impact on the welfare state. Why do you have to say it's like they don't care about the welfare state?
Yeah, they're in favor of it. Like, and
Should
I've
we force dads to staying with the mom? If it's like, yeah, and then the conservatives are like, yeah, that sounds good to me.
and well, the thing is like you like all of their argument. Like, I've gone through like not all. There are good arguments, but all of the mainstream arguments are horrible. Like, the idea that, oh, you don't support taking care of the kids after they're born, therefore, like, you can't ban this. Like, and it's like, I pointed out, like, I don't support you going and killing a random homeless person, but that doesn't mean I have to let him live in my house. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Also, these like Christian conservatives, like, when they went into they're like, these many pregnancy centers, crisis pregnancy centers exist, and they want to shut them down. All they do is like give clothes and food and like breast milk. Like, they're definitely anti-abortion, but that's what they give out. They do support the parents after the kid's born. That's like the whole thing. They actually create a community for these people in order to keep, like, it's for their pro life agenda, sure, but like, they do that. Like, they don't want to, like, they're the ones who don't give their own money. Like, I always find it very questionable when somebody sees a problem and then they say, someone has to do something about it, and then they walk away and go on with their lives, versus somebody who sees a problem and says, I have to do something about it. These are like the people that, if somebody's having a heart attack, are holding up their phones recording it, and they're like, someone call 911. And anything, if you ever taken a CPR course, they tell you, if you want somebody to call 911, pick a person out from a crowd, put them on the spot, and say, you call 911. And they'll actually get called. Because if you say someone called 911, everybody will be like, I guess somebody's doing that. Like, you have to actually put individual responsibility on people for these things.
But yeah, going back to the stool thing, you mentioned that like we're probably at a point where like you can't cut these social conservatives out. If anything, Yaron Brook did an episode about this a few months ago, but if anything, the Republicans have cut out the like economic, like the free market economics part of that stool, and it's unfortunate. I would like to see that part of the stool come back, and I think this is largely more of a cultural debate that needs to be had. It can't be solved politically. Where, yeah, if you want to move the culture in a certain direction, you have to change people's minds and the way they think about stuff like religion and values and what they want out of life.
It's this weird thing where they don't talk about spending anymore, and they're like tariffs and bring back like use the government to force people to bring back the jobs, but then
destroy
like
big tech.
Yeah, get rid of big tech, or
Michael
like
Lowell's literally, he tweeted like, "Oh, big tech needs to be destroyed." It's not like, "Oh, I think things will be better if we just broke up Twitter or force Google to sell YouTube."
Yeah, and the thing is, by the way, they invest heavily in advertising in big tech and all that, and like, I people at the Daily Wire have had dinner with Mark Zuckerberg. I haven't had dinner with Mark Zuckerberg, but yeah, so they're like that, but at the same time, like, they still have that weird, Tea Party-esque thing where like they want to get rid of all the power of the regulatory agencies in other regards, which I think is great. Like, like I remember they set a goal of like getting rid of 2 regulations every time you introduce one.
Yeah.
And I remember the Young Turks, and it was like, oh, so they're going to say in order to have a new regulation, they're going to put lead in your water. It's like, all right, well, maybe not the one that, like, everybody's just waiting to dump lead in your water. Like, maybe not that one, but you get rid of the one that treats milk like an oil spill, like, like, or some of this, the amount of ridiculous, pointless regulations in the that are like objectively stupid, that if you ask any person, like, should this exist, that are there, is insane. So like they will cut a bunch of regulation, like a bunch of red tape, but then like at the same time, it's like Trump would want a 25% tariff on something because 25% is a good number. Like when even his advisors were like, oh, maybe 20%, 21. He's like, no, 25. Like you got to have it as a strong number and all that. It's like, it's so ridiculous.
I think FDR once like arbitrarily picked a certain tax rate because he thought it was a lucky number at one point. Yeah, I think a lot of conservatives, I think they are fair weather free marketers. They'll love to they'll hold up Milton Friedman. They'll maybe hold up Ayn Rand or Thomas Sowell whenever they want to dunk on the left for being stupid, crazy socialists. But then, like, when big tech does something they don't like, if Disney steps out of line, then they're like, okay, now we got to change some laws. Now we got to impose some tariffs or whatever.
Well, it's a weird thing with Disney. So should they have done that in response to Disney's speech, basically? I would say no. But should they have given the Walt Disney Company this weird, like, special status for them to build a super city back when Walt Disney was alive that is legitimately just a theme park? And then it just held forever because, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. Like, so you're in like these weird positions where it's like, maybe they'll bungle their way into like I remember Georgia was going to pull some like perks that they were giving Delta to be headquartered in Georgia, but it's like Atlanta's airport is the number one most traveled through like commercial airport in the United States. Did you need to make the airports make that a hub? Like obviously they would do that because that's where the people are. Like, so like, yeah, like maybe they should get rid of these things, but not for the reasons that they're saying. Because then it's like, well, if you say the right thing, we give you these perks, and then if you don't, then we're going to take them away. It's a strange thing where they might accidentally become free market by accident, but like clearly they're doing it, to punish who they disagree with.
Yeah. And I think it's a form of fascism ultimately to offer certain businesses favors in exchange for not taking a certain political position or, whatever it is. Like, oh, we're going to offer you favors because this might create job, or we're going to take it away because you took a political position that we don't agree with.
I see somebody saying that's how politics work, but like we're talking about like what ought to be.
Yeah.
Right now, like we understand that. I talked about housing in New York recently, and I talked about food deserts and separately. I think I don't remember. I put out.
Let me guess. It's the housing problem and the food deserts. They're a result of unfettered, unregulated capitalism.
For sure, but like they also, we have like all these housing schemes in New York City where you have to hold this many units below market value. And then, and like this many units, are technically your free market units, quote unquote, but they end up becoming luxury units in order to offset, because not only do these below market value units not make money because they're below market value, but the people that move in win on a lottery. So there's like very bad screening. So there's like horror stories of like these buildings and all that. But so in order to solve the food deserts, because, they're everywhere, there's no grocery stores in New York City. I don't know if you know that at all.
What's weird? I feel like I never heard the word bodega until like 3 months ago, and now I hear it all the fucking time.
Yeah, it's just repeated constantly. But because there's no grocery stores, these buildings that are already like a mess, like you got union regulations on the construction, like everything just takes too long, costs too much. Not as bad as California, but now they also subsidize like grocery stores, and politicians hate like those run down garbage grocery stores that the plebs go to. So they subsidize high-end grocery stores like Whole Foods and like Trader Joe's and like all these like very like fancy brands in these neighborhoods. And then those stores end up, because they have all these advantages, out compete the actual stores that are there, thus creating your food desert problem. Like it's the craziest like series of rules and regulations and all that. It's just ugh.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was last year, it was reported that Ralph's Kroger, whatever, I think it's probably Kroger in New York, but it's Ralph's in California. They were closing like 5 different locations throughout LA and Long Beach because the city passed hero pay to like raise pay for like workers. And it's like, oh, now we want, and people wonder why there's like a lack of grocery stores in a lot of these poorer areas.
I remember you did a video on Starbucks, and you played these guys talking about how, oh, I would pay like this little bit more, like it was like they would say I would pay $1 more for my latte if that meant these people would get a living wage and benefits and all that. And then you do a video that's a follow-up, and it turns out the increase is like 17 cents more, something like that, like way smaller. And it's to give them more than $15 an hour plus benefits. And people are like, get Elizabeth Warren to investigate Starbucks for raising their prices 17 cents. Like these people are that are behind these schemes have no connection to reality. And it's the perfect example of revealed preference versus stated preference.
Yeah, this happened with Chipotle and McDonald's as well. It's just like, yeah, it's like, oh, I'd be more than, yeah, they used to say this with McDonald's, like, oh, I'd be willing to pay 50 cents more for a double cheeseburger if I knew the person behind the counter was getting a living wage. And then these companies say, well, we're going to raise prices so we can give, it's not because, and I'll be honest, I don't think it's because out of like the bottom of their heart, they want to like pay their workers a living wage. It's because we have a labor shortage and they're all competing for labor right now. And the only way they can compete is by raising prices, unfortunately. And then people like the Dan Prices and the Cenk Uygurs of the world, the Robespierre Reiches, they try to say, oh, this is just corporate greed and they're trying to blame their work. It's like they're not blaming their workers. They're just explaining why prices are going up.
But what in your video, didn't you point out that coffee was also the most like shocked product by the lockdown too?
By lockdowns, and I don't know if it was trade restrictions, but yeah, the price of coffee has been going up across the board the last few months.
Yes,
it's and you specialize in criminal justice and whatnot. I just read earlier today that Starbucks is closing a variety of locations in places like Seattle and Los Angeles because it's not safe for the workers anymore. Like crime is going up, and it's making working at a Starbucks dangerous, unfortunately.
And they're profitable locations, but like and the thing is, there's so many issues with the bathroom situation. And a long time ago, when those 2 guys got arrested in Philadelphia for the Starbucks bathroom, I made a video where they announced that they were going to let everybody off the street use their bathrooms. And I'm like, listen, because I had been declined. I live in New York City. I went to school in Manhattan where there's Starbucks on every corner. If you used to need a code on the receipt where I was to use the bathroom there. And like, I also, sometimes go out to Long Island where there's less people in the store per location or whatever. And there is no code system because like you don't have that much urban traffic. Like these people don't understand that the employees that make no money, that they're starving, they're not making a living wage. They have to clean up after all these people. So in big high traffic urban areas, this is why Starbucks intelligently let their staff make their own policy. They have those security measures on the bathroom, which seems absurd, but you got to have them. So I've been rejected by Starbucks. So the idea that it was a racial thing and not you didn't buy anything thing is absurd. And I said in that video that they're going to start shutting down the bathrooms, or like just saying that they don't have any bathrooms, or they're going to start shutting down stores because people find needles and all these different problems. Like homeless people, I once opened a bathroom in Manhattan in Starbucks that didn't have a locking mechanism, and there was a homeless guy in a state of undress washing his stuff in the sink. Like just normal, like what I guess. So I just you got to back out of the situation, pretend, don't make eye contact, you know, because they get predatory when you make eye contact and just move along. So like there's a reason for that. And now they've already started announcing that the first trick was that they were going to have smaller locations because usually the number of seats requires you to have a bathroom. So they started opening up these Starbucks pop-ups, and I did a video on that. And now this new thing is that the ones that are profitable, that have these big locations, they're just going to shut them down. Like it doesn't make sense. And somebody's calling me like a drug warrior right now. Like just because I think that something should be legal for adults doesn't mean I think that everybody has to put up with addicts. Like that's crazy.
Yeah. No, I'm not, I'm the same way in that I'm for drug legalization. I don't think any drug should be legal, but yeah, it shouldn't be illegal for people to just sleep on the street and shoot heroin.
Yeah.
I think this actually another issue I wanted to talk about, because a while back someone commented on one of my videos like asking me if I could like say something about something you said about marijuana in a video, and I don't know what they were talking about exactly. I don't know. What are your thoughts on marijuana, I should ask?
So I don't personally partake in marijuana, but I think it should be legal. Like I'm
What
just
a
not
square.
like I'm not interested in it. Like I've tried it before. I'm not like, oh no, marijuana scares me or anything like that. And you know, I've drank enough, and alcohol is, you know, worse in a ton of regards, and you know, done other things that were not good. But yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine with it. It's just I might not want to associate with somebody whose like life is based on marijuana.
Yeah.
Like, and that's really, you know, and my brother smokes enough for the two of us. So like, but yeah, like I don't have any issue with it. I mean, I've done like disparity videos on like how the marijuana disparity isn't really a thing. And like anything, it depends on how you do it, because I did a video on California losing money on marijuana. I think you've done a video on this too. Like,
Yeah, they it was reported last year that the California government was like going to spend $100 million on bailing out and subsidizing dispensaries because they're losing money because of high taxes and environmental regulations that makes it insanely expensive to do business, to the point where there's still a black market. And I've heard that this happens in Washington state and Canada too, where marijuana is so expensive in these places where they have high taxes and intense regulations that there's still a black market because it's cheaper on the black market.
well, it's also the black market has grown in California somehow. Like somehow they legalize it. They somehow California bungled this, that they legalize it. And I knew they were gonna not make money as soon as they were like, as soon as they say they're gonna fund education, get ready. Like
Yeah.
it's you know it's gonna collapse. But
It's for the kids. Like I say, what about the children? It's the most cowardly yet most effective argument in American politics.
that's one of the reasons why I'm not into the whole, like, you know, I can understand the problem with what's going on with kids a lot. That's one of the reasons I'm not super into talking about it, because like most people are against that. It's like low hanging fruit. But I remember I watched a piece on California's like legal marijuana growing operations back when it was just medical, and they were like, oh, this is where the state inspectors like decide like if this weed is up to snuff, and then they have to throw out all this other like marijuana that doesn't meet the jurisdiction, and then they cut, and they're like, some unscrupulous people will sell this on the black market. And it's like, well, yeah, if you're gonna toss half of their perfectly good product and say you can't sell this because it doesn't meet our standards, then they're definitely going to sell it out the other. It's a giant pile that's bigger than the pile that actually is going to be taken and taxed and all that. Like, you know, I don't farm something so that I can only harvest 1/3 of it.
Yeah, absolutely crazy. Yeah. And that's the thing is I think marijuana should be legal, not because of like there was some scientific study somewhere that said, oh, it might have some therapeutic benefits. It might have some medical. I've never really read too much into the science, and I don't really need to, because I think people should be allowed to use it recreationally. Do I think it's always a good idea to do that? Probably not. But yeah, and then I mentioned this the other day during a stream. Like, I can think that it should be legal, but that doesn't mean that I always think that people should have, as you said, like have their life centered around it. I've always had this issue with something like yoga. Like yoga offers a lot of like legitimate benefits that can make your life better. But then a lot of times when you go to a yoga class and hang out with other yogis, they're like a bunch of like astrological hippie nutsos. And
It becomes like an identity.
Yeah.
Rather than an activity. And And somebody's saying that they should put addicts into like rehab or jail or whatever, like force them in there. What I would say is that if you're gonna construct policy to deal with addicts, like you have to, obviously unintended consequences. Part of the reason why they happen is because you didn't foresee them. But like, other countries have injection sites for addicts. Like that's what they do, right? Injection sites are so much better because you bring them in and then you do you have them do the injection in a place. The San Francisco, where they're like, here's 100,000 needles. I'm sorry, it's something like 250,000 needles they give out, and like they don't require you to return them or anything, and they end up all over the streets. Like, if you're gonna give me like two options of what I would prefer, it's like injection site every single time. Like, it seems like there are people who are committed to doing the worst thing possible all the time in the name of sympathy or empathy or whatever, altruism or whatever the problem is. Like, I remember when there's like poop all over San Francisco, and they're like, we should hand out leaflets to teach the homeless about that you're not supposed to poop on the street. And it's like they have to teach them proper sanitation. It's like, no, like if that was my choice between that and building bathrooms, I'd be like, I guess you should build bathrooms. But then again, I remember in New York City, one bathroom that had 2 stalls once cost the city of New York $2 million. And you should look it up. It's not nice.
Yeah, Mike Schellenberger talks a lot about this in his book San Francisco, and how the city spent, between federal, state, and local subsidies, they spend roughly $32,000 per homeless person on housing alone. And somehow, like he talked about, like how just building homeless shelters would cost over like $500,000 per unit to build. And a reason for that is, again, because of the construction and environmental regulations.
It's also the graft. Great Simpsons episode is the monorail thing, where all these projects are scams, and great song in that episode, but also great message in the episode. And it's like the California, I remember there was like $250,000 for apartment unit in LA for the homeless. And every few months or whatever, like the estimate would go up. And it's now like $800,000, like 880. It's like high 800,000, and they're projecting that it's going to be $1 million in given another 2 years. And it's like, you can't build an apartment for, like, everywhere in this country. You could theoretically build a house for well under $1 million, like, but you can't build an apartment for a homeless person for less than 800,000. Like, what's, like, there's so much money being just outright stolen. Like, and that's the only proper word to use it, like, by all these interest groups, because every time the government does this, and I get that this is part of the nature of government, like, everybody wants a piece of the pie, but it's like, it used to be like, the mob would take their cut, but they deliver you the service. Like, the government, they're going to take their cut, and these projects never get finished. Like, how many times did they shorten that stupid rail thing that you have to deal with in California, and that ballooned to like $100 billion, and it's going to be ready in what, 2050?
Yeah, and this isn't a new problem either. This started during the Civil War years, with the idea of building a transcontinental railroad, which came with a lot of subsidies and favors. And those railroads were built like shit, constantly had to be repaired. The heads of the company were riddled with scandals and whatnot. So
the only unsubsidized railway is the only
Great
one
Northern Pacific.
Yeah, it's the only one that's still in business. Like, once the subsidies ended, all these other ones collapse, like, or were bought out or whatever. Like, so it's just insane to, and obviously it's happened throughout history, but I see this in New York all the time. We there's like a staircase, like it's stairs that brings you into a train station. There's nothing fancy about it. It's a hole in the ground, and then they shape some things. $30 million. They're the New York, because the government passes regulations and then they're exempt from their own regulations. So finally, the city of New York was like, okay, like, we've been out of compliance with the Americans for Disabilities Act forever, and like New York City's own versions of it. So they're like, we're gonna update that, because there's no elevators in most of the subways in New York. So they did the numbers. They have them in 6%. If you don't have the proper things for the hand, if your mirror is too high for like a theoretical like midget or wheelchair person to see their own reflection in your bathroom, if your light switch isn't near the like the lower half of your door because of somebody in a chair, like they will press charges against you. If you do that in your own home, it's an illegal modification. Like my lady works in commercial real estate. Like they come in and inspect like that to bother you. But they don't even have elevators, and then they say, "Oh, it's going to take us 30 years to get elevators in like most train stations because it costs over 10 million a year to put in an elevator." These are mostly one floors too. It's so crazy.
And if you ever talk about maybe reforming some of these regulations, you get people saying like, "Oh, so you think it should be legal for businesses to cut corners and build a building that might collapse in 5 years, huh?"
Well, the like, you know, and they found an example in Florida that they've been clinging to.
Or as
That
Anna
Miami,
Kasparian might say, like, "Oh, so you think it should be legal for someone to build a new house with lead pipes, huh?"
like, lead pipes are actually kind of fine. Like I live in New York, a bunch of lead pipes exist. It's our water's not acidic enough to like strip out that lead. Like that was one of the problems that Flint had. But you know, now I would say probably not. Don't put lead pipes in the thing. And I assume most people, there's not a lot of lead smelting companies anymore. So like, you know, buying that much lead for piping would probably not be the cheapest way to do it. The evil capitalist might have solved that problem. But yeah, no, it's crazy how much graft is everywhere. I remember I was like, you know, France has unions. They have huge public sector, all that stuff. We would consider them even more to the left of the United States in a lot of regards. But the New York City MTA employs 4 times as many people to dig a mile of tunnel for the subway than the French subway system. Like, and it's like, can you like I'm like at the point where I'm like, can you steal a little less? Can you employ 3 times as many people? Like, is that too much of a demand? I might have to pull a lefty and be like, does anybody really need 4 times the employees required for this situation? Like, Jesus Christ, it's so absurd.
And yeah, and you see it happening with like electricity in places like California and Texas and places like Germany and Denmark, where these unreliable forms of energy, mostly wind, but also solar, have gotten government favors for decades, for over a decade through mandates and subsidies and tax breaks. And now all of these places have higher electricity rates, and they're constantly prone to rolling blackouts and whatnot. Like the other week, Texas was asking its residents to conserve energy to not overload the grid because, oh, it's not going to be as windy this week.
Well, Sri Lanka is leading the world in green energy. I just want to point that out.
Oh God. I was surprised. I got a few comments from people who claim to be from Sri Lanka who were glad that I covered that topic, and I didn't know I had that much of a reach.
But you're right. And Texas, by the way, is one of these one of the worst in terms of their energy grid. Now they say like, oh, it's unregulated capitalism because they don't hook it up to the nationwide grid, like out of state, so that they can control it within the state. But they're heavily subsidizing wind. And I remember Rick Perry was like, Texas is leading the country in wind turbines.
Greg Abbott bragged about it 2 years ago, and it started with George Windmill Bush when it wasn't so much subsidies, but he started a trend of mandating that Texas transition to wind away from more reliable forms of energy.
And it's like I mean, Texas is an oil state. Like you would think if anywhere you could build nuclear power, it would be Texas. Like I forget. There's a guy, he's a big nuclear guy. He did a TED talk and all that. He's the one who convinced me on nuclear power because, you know, I used to be a dumb idiot and I used to listen to, like, I don't know if you know that. I said I listened to a lot of Alex Jones. I don't know if you know this, but Alex Jones, little bit of a conspiracy guy. Like
You don't say.
Yeah. So he was like, so, you know, and it's not just him. Like, you get anti-nuclear propaganda everywhere. Like, the whole idea that, you know, a nuclear reactor can blow up like a nuclear bomb is propaganda. It's like, it's the safest form of energy, and it's really been doomed by circumstances. Like, we heard it was called atomic energy after 2 atomic bombs were dropped. After the movie The China Syndrome, came out like the same week. 3 Mile Island melted down, so people associated that disaster with the China syndrome. Meanwhile, nobody died at 3 Mile Island. It's fine. Everybody relax, like, you know.
Well, they
And
would say that the residents there like had like a spike in cancer rates. I actually just watched a documentary series on this a few weeks ago, and I never looked into it. But I said, but like, I'm not saying they're wrong, but like the way they framed it, they said like the rate of cancer went up by like doubled. But I'm like, but what's the context? Did it go from like 1% to 2%? Like maybe that's something we should look into. I'm not trying to brush it off,
yeah.
but like to make it sound like, oh, the rates doubled, like it might be an insignificant doubling though.
Well, it's like Chernobyl, the worst in history.
Yeah.
They've studied it a million times. Like, you know, all these different international organizations, a bunch of these green anti-nuclear organizations have had legitimate studies. They found out that like 4,000 people got like this, like, you know, radiation related cancers, and like some of those are like the most treatable of cancers, and that's the worst disaster that ever happened. So I don't even believe the doubling of the cancer rate. And the thing is like people could have moved into an area, and like there could have been a population change where you have people more prone to cancer. You know what I mean? So if you have like, if like, you know, we know that wealthier people would move away from a nuclear power plant, right? And we also know that wealthier people are less likely to smoke. So like if you have this area like transition, just as one example, to like just a poor economic area, then you're gonna have like more smokers on average, right? Just that's just one example of how things could change. But yeah, I don't believe it. Like I've seen things like people do reports about this nuclear reactor in New Jersey that's leaking tritium into the water. And I'm like, oh my god, tritium! That's the thing in Spider-Man. Like I know that's scary. Dr. Octopus wanted it. And then I watched a video from a nuclear engineer. He's like, you know, you get more like tritium and you're eating it from a banana than what's leaking into the water supply. So like nuclear just sounds much scarier than it is. Radiation is invisible. It's like all the things that like trigger primal fear, an unknown threat like that you can't see, you can't smell, or anything like that. And if the goal is a low carbon power or no carbon power, like that's where you would go. But you have Greta Thunberg who's like, no, it's like she just says it's in the same category as coal. And
we call her Greta No Funberg here, okay?
Right. I know you did a video on her recently. But and I remember you talking about Bill Maher, who's been like good on certain issues. Like he's big on like the no graft, but he's a huge promoter of Greta.
Oh yeah. Oh, Zoomers these days, they should look up to Greta more than they do Kylie Jenner. But yeah, going to nuclear, this is something that Alex Epstein talks more about with fossil fuels. But like, you have to look at the big picture. Like, are there risks for nuclear energy? Probably. But you also have to consider the enormous benefits, which is cheap, reliable energy that will bring down the cost of living for a lot of people and will probably save a lot of people from other risks, like maybe going to the emergency room and having the hospital nice and lit up instead of trying to have it rely on solar power or wind power or whatever. Yeah, and talking about, you know, California, we're always prone to drought. And, you know, the recent story, Huntington Beach desalination plant project got rejected. And the reason why there's this anti-desalination talk is because energy in California is so expensive. And they say, well, we can't build a desalination plant because then we'd have to burn more fossil fuels that will contribute to climate change and make us more prone to drought. And it's like, yeah, but like if we built nuclear power, I mean, maybe not, but if we just had more energy, we would be less prone to drought.
Yeah. And the materials, once a nuclear power plant is up and running, like the materials that you need, they're plentiful. You know what I mean? Like you know, they do those like nerd calculations where it's like, oh, if we switched everything to nuclear, we'd be able to power it on like current like reserves for like 300 years, no problem, or whatever. Now, all those calculations are dumb because they're basic math and they don't factor in that when stuff becomes scarce, people look for more of it. This is why, you know, your proven oil reserves are, you know, like if you look at it over time, we've like depleted way more than the proven oil reserves. It's because people look for more oil.
Yeah.
But yeah, so nuclear, you know, it could solve so much of the problems, but they hate it because it works. Like a lot of it is just anti-industrial, like it, you know, it's like it's their religion, and the sin is a wealthy lifestyle. It's one of the reasons I can't get on board with these people, because you propose any kind of solution and like a lot of them are dumb. Like they'll just think like, oh, like we can suck the carbon out of the air with like some machine. And then I learned that, well, basic thermodynamics means that you have to use the same amount of energy that it took to burn the carbon to get it in the air to get it out of the air. So like it's the only solution, but they're all against it institutionally. And even Michael Moore in his video and his friends, his
Yeah.
sponsored film, even
Planet
that,
of the Humans.
yeah, they're like like it was basically like we gotta like kill the humans, like not saying it, but like they were like humans are the problem, population is the problem.
Well,
It's
they
like
say capitalism is the problem, and they're right when they talk about like all these quote unquote green energy sources like wind and solar. They take a lot of energy to mine the materials and put them together, and so you're going to burn off a lot of fossil fuels just to build the solar panels and the windmills, and then those are going to have an impact on nature because especially like in the deserts, like in the Mojave, those kill birds because birds will fly over them, and like it's all heated up air, and then they get scorched or they get hit by a wind turbine.
I'll tell you the thing that made me realize that solar panels were stupid. And it's not theoretically, it's not stupid in theory. Like sun energy there, harvest energy from big
Yeah.
energy ball. I get it, right? I went to I watched Superman. That's how he gets his powers. But the fact that solar panels work worse when they get hot, I was like, I'm done on this. I quit. Like they have to be out in the sun, but when they get heated up, they generate less energy. It's a wrap for me. Like build a nuclear power plant.
Yeah, build more nuclear and more fossil fuels too. I love fossil fuels.
Yes, fossil fuels are amazing. Like, and by the way, one of the benefits of nuclear is that something like 50,000 people die from like air pollution, and that's not and I know a lot of that. There's like an inflated stat. I think it might be 300,000 people die from air pollution, but like the huge majority of them are indoor air pollution by burning sticks and like dung in
Yeah.
their house. So if they actually had some oil and coal, they would be fine.
Yeah.
But like there's like shortened lifespan from putting this like stuff into the air, like, but yeah, but no, nuclear radiation meltdown, whatever, it's gonna kill us all, something.
It's absolutely crazy. Other questions. How much more time do you have?
Yeah, whatever you need.
Okay, I got to get going in about 20, 25 minutes. Got to get going around 8. Which crimes so you're big in criminal law and focusing on crimes, but even economic regulations. Which crimes or laws do you think are in most need of reform? Could be local level, state level, or federal level.
Well, I have so there's like a big no catch bail movement. I think that's dumb. Like we're almost like prone to be stupid like when it comes to criminal justice. So like when crime was a big problem, we did mandatory minimums and we're like, you know what, you commit this crime, you bare minimum, no matter what the circumstances, you're going to go away for this period of time. And rather than like getting rid of that, we've gone the other way and we're like, okay, now it's basically like a mandatory cap or like all these restrictions. And it's like, do you not realize that we call the people that preside over trials judges because we want them to use judgment? And all we do legislatively is take away their power to use judgment. But if I was going to go fundamental like policy that I would change is I wouldn't have elected judges anywhere in the country. Like most states in this nation have judges that run campaigns. And it's like I can't not help but notice the fact that, just before an election year, all of a sudden they're super strict on their sentences. They're super strict on how much bail they're going to give you because they don't want anybody to get out and like reoffend. And I don't think that the judicial system should be subject to the whims directly of the political process. So that's something I would get rid of. I'm not in favor of anything that's super rigid, but the bail reform's got to go. Like this whole idea that you can commit a million of the same crime and they can never factor that against you and they're just going to let you out, or that they don't assess your past record or anything like that. That's crazy. Like if like you can try to say be more lenient unless you genuinely think they're going to offend while they're out, but you can't let people that for sure are going to offend as soon as you let them out. It's crazy, and it causes abuse in the mental health system because when there was a story of this guy who kept robbing banks over and over again, And they eventually like decided to say that he was psychiatrically a problem, and then they put him on a psychiatric hold, like to keep him in jail because they couldn't keep him in jail, or they tried to turn him over to the feds in order to keep him in jail because. And like I don't think that reclassifying these criminals all as sick, mentally ill, or whatever is going to lead to good outcomes down the line.
Wasn't that something that Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez was pushing for? I think I remember like Now This doing like some video about it.
Making criminals be viewed as sick, or
Just
no
it
bail.
was something about like trying to like get a lot of, I don't know. I probably shouldn't talk about it if I don't remember the details. This was a thing in Better Call Saul. I don't know if you've been watching that show, but have you?
My girl watches it. I
Yeah.
haven't watched it.
Well, there's a point where this criminal that he's defending is being held on murder charges, and he's being held without bail, and then Saul has to like argue for him to like get a bail set, and it ends up getting set at like $7 million, and then the guy's like, oh yeah, because he's like a high level drug cartel leader. He's like, yeah, I
Right.
can handle that.
Yeah. I mean, it like it's like I understand in principle innocent until proven guilty and all that, but like sometimes we have these dudes on video, we know that they're guilty. Like you maybe hold them in a little while, especially if they've reoffended a million times. Like I cover these stories where they let some guy out for attempted murder after 3 years. He did parole violations while he was out. They didn't violate his parole because you can violate your parole, but until the parole officer said files the thing, brings it before a judge, they don't actually throw you back in jail. And then this guy, he killed somebody else. Like he actually killed somebody the second time. So I was like, well, was his crime originally, because it was attempted murder, but they were like, oh, a gang thing. So I was like, oh, maybe he was there, was like, involved in it, so you got charged with it. It's like, no, he shot somebody randomly, and then in his original crime that he got attempted murder, he shot somebody randomly. Like it's the same exact crime. Like, so it's like they let him out after too short of a time, and he just reoffends, and he was able to violate his parole a million times. He rejoined the gang. It's like, what are you doing? And the second time he killed somebody. Like the first time the guy survived, thankfully.
What's it like living in a blue city in a blue state? Because I often mock and ridicule and complain about California politics and Los Angeles politics and a lot of the stupid shit that goes on here politically. And I often get asked by viewers like, hey, well, when are you going to move out of California? So maybe I should ask you, when are you going to move out of New York, huh?
So I'm seeing a girl that I will eventually ask to marry me and get married. And she is, she's decided to go back to law school. Or go to law school. She graduated with an accounting degree and decided she also wanted to do lawyer stuff. So I'm kind of like invested here. I have family here and all that, like things that go beyond, politics. But yeah, it would have to get to a certain point where like she wouldn't feel comfortable and my family ties wouldn't feel comfortable that they would want to move, because I could work from anywhere. For me to demand that they move with me is like it's not cool to do to your, but hopefully your future wife. So yeah, and as far as what it's like, I live in a district where my city council person, my state representative, and I'm sure if this is the only district, and they changed them all. So if you think you know where I live, don't worry. They changed all the districts. But I, for sure, the last go around lived in a district where city council, state representative, state assembly person, whatever they call it, are all Democrats that run unopposed. So, like, I don't even have to leave my house on election day because I know how it's going to go. So there's a little bit of a relief in that.
I actually had to leave my, I wasn't sure how I felt about mail-in balloting, and I still don't think, I think that you should have to like go to the polls, but it just so happened that I got COVID the week I had to like go drop off my ballot. I'm like, God damn it. Of course I'd be unable, like not like the mail-in ballot totally applied to me this year.
Oh, the mail-in, I got it. I still didn't vote. I was like, whatever. And by the way, they sent me a whole bunch of them. I don't know, like to my building.
Going back to what you said earlier about voting on judges, there was like over like 100 different candidates I had to look at because there were all these judges up for election. And I'm thinking, everyone always talks about how we need more democracy. And I'm like, if anything, we need less. I can't keep up with all this shit. Yeah, even in the days of like the internet where like, you can look up everyone's website. It's like totally time consuming. And a lot of these people aren't really, they use very vague language and it's hard to like get a read on a lot of them.
Yeah, no, and again, like the idea that you're voting, like I'm a fan of the unelected branches of government. Like, the original Constitution, one half of one branch of the government was directly elected, the House of Representatives. And if you wanted to be involved in your senator's race, then you would invest in your local politics because
Yes.
your state legislature would pick them. So we've actually disincentivized knowing what's going on the local level. And then we wonder why, there's all this graft at the local level that, you see it on the news every 3 years. Have you ever watched the documentary, The Cartel?
I don't think so.
Oh, definitely watch it. It's this local guy in New Jersey, and he investigates the best funded school in the state public school system in the country, which is New Jersey. And he just goes through all these scandals, and he's like, nobody pays attention, so they'll like do an investigation. They'll find like $30 billion went missing or whatever. It's like the biggest corruption scandal in the state of New Jersey, and then they'll just start another investigation because nobody paid attention to the first one. So this like local news guy who obviously he's back, he pushes charter schools by the end of it, spoiler alert, but he was like investigating he was doing all these school corruption local news scandals, and he's like, wait a minute, like there's a giant pattern here. And he does it just about New Jersey, and you can see like how corrupt their system is, even compared to like another public school system. Like, so he'll compare it to Maryland, which has the same size of, student population. And he'll be like, they have like 47 like superintendents, principals, whatever, right? Because they have 47 districts. We have 850. Like, they all are staffed, building. It's so crazy how they operate. And that's what the best funded school system gets you. And the grades, not impressive. Definitely watch it. Some places are free for it. Do you have a Roku or no?
Yes.
Yeah, search it in the Roku, The Cartel, and like it will come up somewhere for free.
Yeah, I've read stories about that happening in Detroit and Washington, D.C., where someone, I think it was especially in Detroit, like they had when they were going bankrupt, they had to have like forensic accountants like explore why the city has so many money troubles. And they found out that a lot of the education money was going into like all these ghost accounts that they couldn't really find, like, where's this money going?
Oh, there's a woman who won like Teacher of the Year that's featured in the film, and she got forced out of her job because she reported that there was 10 salaries for counselors. She's like, we have 7 counselors. Like, so there's like ghost salaries that are there. So it's very common, and they get rid of you. It's called The Cartel for a reason.
And then people like the goofs over at the Gravel Institute will blame like our poor education on unfettered, unregulated capitalism.
Oh, we've defunded education.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Haven't you heard?
They barely get any money. No, I did a video on this a few weeks ago titled, "Are We Proud of Public Education?" Where like New York City, I think, spends the most. They spend like $28,000 per student per year on education, and their proficiency scores in math and English are just terrible.
Yeah.
Oh, and the solution is, we'll just spend some more money because, hey, education is the future.
We'll spend some more money, and we'll get rid of all the specialized schools because they're discriminatory, because the same population, like it's not an equal distribution of the population. Those darn Asian and Indian kids are getting into them way too much.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. If anything reinforces my opinion that we need to privatize we need to move toward privatizing education fully, get more competition in this market, and bring some more accountability to this industry.
Yeah, they basically, you'll actually see how they get rid of the application process for the Jersey charter school system, and like just how ridiculous it's so hard to explain, because it's not that hard to explain, but it's amazing when you see it, because they'll have, like, it's like a 700-page document, and then if you make a mistake, then they deny you anywhere on there, but then they won't tell you why they denied you, because they consider that, doing your application for you, right? So like these people ended up finding out that they accidentally listed part-time positions, like 2 part-time nurses, as full-time, but the salaries, everything was correct. It was just in one section they listed as full-time, and that's their mistake. But then they can't reapply for a year because the system is set up specifically so that they get declined. So their application was perfect except for one tiny line, and then they had to find it after because they wouldn't tell them. So like that's how like invested they are in denying these charter schools. Like it's the grip on education that the teachers union has, which of course is a natural consequence of the government basically taking a monopoly on education. It's horrific.
Yeah. I remember, wasn't it earlier this year that the Chicago teachers union was trying to keep schools closed, and even Lori Lightfoot, who's a Democrat, was like, no, this has gone off long enough, you guys.
No. And somebody saying teachers are underpaid. What do you think about that talking point?
I mean, I don't know. I would have to look into it. I'm guessing. Well, this was another part of my public education video. Was a lot of these districts have unionized teacher staffs, and it's like it's like the socialist wet dream. A lot of money, government monopoly over it, unions, everything, and they still try to blame it on unfettered, unregulated capitalism.
It's also like, remember, the school year is 181 days.
Yeah.
Like, so like if you were to actually break down what they're making like in a prorated level, it's a little better. And they get summers off, which is nice.
And sometimes it can be hard to measure because a lot of times you'll just get salary numbers, and that obviously does not include stuff like retirement benefits and health insurance benefits and all that wonderful stuff.
Yeah, it's like go in the private market and see what position that you can get after 3 years. You're locked in for your employer contributing to your pension for life and healthcare for life.
And I would offer a counter. So like, if it's really about teachers getting underpaid, what if we had a privatized education system and teachers got paid, say, 30% more than they do now? Would you guys be in favor of it? I'm willing to bet that the public school advocates would still say no.
Oh, it's not to harp on the abortion issue, but it's like, oh, we don't have universal health care or free childcare.
Yeah.
So how can you do? It's like, but you wouldn't be in favor of getting rid of abortion if we had all those things.
Well, yeah. And then what are they saying? Like, on one hand, they'll say, oh, abortion needs to be legal. And I think they're right to say this because the government should not get involved in healthcare decisions. But then they say, oh, well, we should have universal healthcare where the government's involved in every healthcare decision.
Yeah. They're half of every, if they're a single payer, half of every healthcare decision. But if you want a UK style system, they run everything.
Oh, they'll just control the financing mechanisms. What's the big deal? Yeah, well, whoever writes the checks makes the rules, as someone once said.
I mean, considering they think that you're a slave to your employer because your employer pays you, you would think they understand that. Like that, whoever's writing the checks makes the rules.
Yeah, and then in a lot of these quote unquote socialized healthcare systems, you see a lot of stuff like healthcare rationing and a lot of different things. One thing I want to look into is to the extent where doctors and healthcare providers are paid. Do they have pay ceilings? Because that was one of the things about the whole Medicare for all thing that came out from the Mercatus study that Bernie ran with. He's like, Medicare for all will actually save us more money. It's like, yeah, that's if you factor in all the price controls, including on labor, like doctors and surgeons and whatnot. And that same report estimates that a lot of people might drop out if they're going to be making significantly less money.
It's like they said they were being very generous to him, the Koch brothers study.
Yeah.
Because they had a podcast where they talked about it, and they're like, yeah, we said it would save money because it says in the law that they're just going to pay everybody year one 60 cents on the dollar. And it's like, well, he's like, we have no idea what would happen. You would think if you took 40 cents out of every dollar, something would happen. Some incentives would be changed, but if you were to do that, then technically you would be spending less money. If you ripped off everybody, that would happen. It's wild how any headline, even if it condemns them. I remember Second Thought. He did that video on why America's just the terriblest. Everything about it was the least free or whatever. And not saying that, America's the most free or the most free market or whatever. But in there, he had that huge section about healthcare. And he cited this activist study that was it factored in all these other things and compared unlike measurements. So sometimes the American healthcare system has a bunch of problems,
Oh,
but sometimes,
absolutely.
yeah, but sometimes they give it like the worst comparisons. Like when they did infant mortality, and I found out that everything in the United States counts as an infant mortality. Like because we're like crazy for babies. Like if you somehow get born after like 10 days and you don't make it, that gets added to the statistics. And then in Europe, it's like almost nothing counts as infant mortality.
Yeah.
Like in France, if you're born before 20 weeks and 24 weeks and you die before that 24 weeks, then you're not born. They don't count you. So you could be born 19 weeks, live to 23 weeks and 6 days, die, and that doesn't count. If you're born after 24 weeks, but you don't survive at least something like 72 hours, they don't count you. Like it's wild how they just compare these unlike measurements. Is it Second Thought or is it somebody else that I'm thinking of? That guy with the stock footage?
It's Second Thought, yeah. Or as someone says in the chat, stack starvation,
Oh.
whatever. He says, Second Thought, you mean no thought, LOL.
I read the first part with the question mark, stopped reading, and then continued without any thought, weirdly enough.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I've dealt with stuff like that before where it's not an apples to apples comparison. And yeah, that's how they pull one over on you. They just try to flash all these statistics and numbers at you and hoping you won't check or notice or anything like that.
my favorite in that video was the America's worst for journalists in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And then then I look into it and it's like a branch fell on a weatherman and his cameraman, killed them both, and that's counted as journalist deaths. And that's the same year Jamal Khashoggi was murdered, like at the order of the Saudi Arabian government. And it's like, why are you comparing these two? And then they had the other thing. They had like a guy who wanted, like, he shot up his old job, and they're like assassin. Like that's the same thing as the crown prince of Saudi Arabia ordering the assassination of a journalist, allegedly.
Yeah, it's incredible what they can get away with. But we got to get going. But my final question, I think you've been talking about this lately. Do you think we're going to have a civil war anytime soon?
No, no. I hope not. And I don't think we're on the cusp of it. I think I said in my recent video that it's there's nothing more vain than thinking that you're living at the end of the world or the end of the republic. Like you're so special that it all comes to a head. The main event, it's all about you. It's ridiculous. It's a LARP. And like the people that hype it and don't necessarily root for it, I have a problem with. But then there's the people that cheer it on. Like this is they call themselves accelerationists, but these are people who would like they wouldn't fight for their own child. Like that's how big of wusses they are if they had any kids. Like that they're like, we're gonna go and it's gonna be a revolution and all that. Like, do you really think that if there's a civil war that you're gonna see like a guy like Vosh and Anna Kasparian like pick up arms? Because that's who's been pushing it on the left side before, or any of the right-wing dopes that say that, like pick any of these like faux tough guys. You really think that those two idiots, like groups of idiots, are gonna fight it out? Like if there's a civil war, it would be the most destructive thing in our nation's history, just like the first Civil War.
Yeah, I think I remember what book. I'm trying to find it on my Kindle right now. It's a book that talks about a lot of history of war, and it's nothing less than victory. And when they talk about the Civil War, they talk about the biggest propagators and encouragers of the Civil War were not the masses or the downtrodden in the South in the Confederacy, but it was the intellectual elite, it was the political class, it was the affluent, the slave owners. They were all glorifying the war, and while their quote unquote Confederate countrymen were getting slaughtered in fields, they just thought it was so wonderful that they were fighting for their country and whatnot. And then when William Tecumseh Sherman started coming into these towns and like burning these plantations to the ground, like all the elites and the politicians, they all fled before they even came to town and they were telling like all the people in these towns, like, yeah, fight for your city, fight for your community. And then they would leave before Sherman would get to town.
Yeah, it's it's the same story. Like, obviously, the people who cheer on the wars. I mean, World War One is another example of this, where there's all this like conflict like baked into all these agreements in these European countries. But if you read some of the material pre World War One, they were like, like a war is really going to sort this out. Like it's this is convoluted and all that, but there's going to be a war. It's going to like there's propaganda for the war before the war. That's everybody was super gung ho before World War One, and they didn't realize that they had like all these chemical weapons, trench warfare, all the horrors that like of modern warfare were inflicted on a totally unprepared population that were propagandized into thinking, well, the next war is going to fix everything. We'll get the border disputes all out of order. And it's like, yeah, don't cheer it on. Like the French like lost so many people, and you look at their intellectual leaders pre World War One, they were like, yo, this is gonna be great. Like it's at first of all, they still had soldiers riding horses, so like they were not prepared for that.
Yeah, someone mentioned Sarah Silverman said peaceful divorce through no. Yeah, a lot of people on the right are saying this. A lot of libertarian types, a lot of conservative types are just saying, "Well, we don't want a civil war. How about just a national divorce?"
I'm not into that. Look, if unfortunately if the country were to break up, like obviously no union is supposed to be permanent and all that, but if the country were to break up, it would be a not great day for the United States of America. But the idea that you're going to break up conservative and lefty America, like, yeah, just look at the Mississippi River, and like people don't understand how important this is. Look at all the states that it goes through. The mouth of it goes out of the port of New Orleans, which would obviously be a left-wing city. Like, if the coasts are going to go to the liberal elites, then you're going to need some access to the sea. Like, that's just a civil war with an extra step. Like,
yeah, I don't think you can have a national, especially when you start getting into stuff about who's on the hook for this $30 trillion worth of national debt.
Yeah, and I would say like devolving power back to the states, because some people like are just disingenuous, so they bring up national divorce, and you push back on them, and they'll be like, well, what I'm saying is that we should devolve power back to the states so people could have more control over their lives on a local level. And it's like, well, that's what I'm in favor of, and I'm not in favor of a national divorce. That's like 10th Amendment crap. That's like Tea Party stuff. Remember when the Tea Party used to care about that? They're like, yeah, 10th Amendment. Like, where'd they go? Where are they hiding?
They traded in their Gadsden flag for MAGA hats. Now
Sure.
that's going to get me in trouble.
It is true though.
Anyway, yeah, so I got to get going. Thanks a lot for coming on today. We should do this again sometime. And where can people find you?
You find me on YouTube at the Actual Justice Warrior. Twitter, I am Sean90 is my Twitter account. SEAN, the old Irish way. On Instagram, which I'm not the best at Actual Justice. Yes, those are all different things, and that's not brand continuity. And I gotta have you on my channel. Like, that's what I gotta do. Like the next time.
You want me to go on a channel of a Koch brother shill?
Koch brother shill, fascist, all that. But yeah, thank you for having me on, Kirk. It's actually nice. This is like the first time we've actually spoken, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. We've messaged each other, but yeah, this is a lot of fun, and I'd love to come on your channel sometime. But
by the way, I met your friend Rucka Ollie.
Oh, yeah. He sent me a video of you saying, subscribe to Kirk Wilcox on youtube.com. And then he panned over to Blair White and she just says, who is that?
Yeah.
I found that amusing.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you for having me on. It was a good time. I definitely need some water though. I'm like chapping up.
Hell yeah, man. Yeah, get some water. It should never be illegal to give someone a drink of water. Tell that to the environmentalist knuckleheads who are shutting down desalination plant projects here in California.
I realized as soon as I said that water was going to be a sensitive subject for you guys out there in California.
Yep. We need more of it, and it's the Greta No Thunbergs who are stopping us from getting it. Anyways, for the Actual Justice Warrior, I'm Kirk Wilcox. You guys have a wonderful evening. And most importantly,
Goodbye, bitch.